Hello, I'm Eric Corman, Communications Director at League of Education Voters. Welcome to our free online webinar series, Lunchtime Webinars. We started this series 6 years ago to share information and build knowledge on important and timely issues. Today's webinar is about the 2020 legislative session, What Washington Got. In the wake of the 2020 legislative session, League of Education Voters Policy and Government Relations team will provide an overview of what happened in Olympia this session, along with status updates on special education, supportive and safe schools, early childhood education, and fair K-12 education funding. Our speakers today are League of Education Voters Director of Policy and Research, Julia Warth, and Lobbyist, Carey Morris. They will answer your questions and let you know what we can do to prepare for the upcoming budget year session in 2021. Julia Warth joined League of Education Voters in 2015. Prior to joining LEV, she worked as a senior research analyst for the Washington State Board of Education, helped launch the Washington State Charter School Association, and worked in public policy consulting. Julia is committed to helping create a school system in which every student has access to an education that prepares and empowers. Julia received her bachelor's in literature and government from Claremont McKenna College in Southern California and returned home to Seattle for her Master of Education degree from the University of Washington. When she's not in the office, Julia enjoys playing in the mountains and spending time with her family. Carey Morris began lobbying state and local government entities in 1999. Prior to this, Carey was the legislative assistant to State Senator Georgia Gardner. Carey has worked with clients ranging from local government entities to grassroots advocacy groups. Carey maintains strong, effectual relationships with clients and public officials by providing accurate research and a commitment to creating strong public policy. When not in Olympia, Carey spends as much time as possible with her 2 boys and 3 dogs enjoying the outdoors. A couple of housekeeping items before we begin. You'll notice a Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. This is a space for you to submit questions to us. As always, feel free to send any feedback about the webinar quality to us on the chat function at the bottom of your screen or at info@educationvoters.org. Welcome, Julia and Carey.
Great, thank you so much, Eric. And as you were giving that lovely introduction, I realized I forgot to change the title page. So it still says Legislative Session Preview. So my apologies, everyone. This is the Legislative Session Wrap Up. So we'll fix that before these go online. So real quick, on the agenda today, Carey is going to provide some 2020 legislative session context to give a sense of how things were working on the ground. Last session, or in the preview, we had discussed the impact that a new speaker might have. And then, of course, we'll talk about the COVID-19 response and the impact that that had on the final budget. Then we'll review the progress that was made on the League of Education Voters 2020 priorities. And then, as Eric mentioned, there will be an opportunity for some Q&A at the end. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Carey, for a bit of session context.
Thank you, Julia. Good afternoon. I'm sure, like many of you, I'm working from home, so there might be some background noise of my children running rampant. Just please ignore. I just think we should start with awareness of that. But the 2019 session, as many of you know, is a short session, 60 days. We were told going in, and also the first few weeks, this is going to be a true supplemental budget session, meaning no large investments, no large projects, really looking at what they had done in the year previous, and they did the big operating budget and the big capital budget, make some adjustments. That was the expectation, and it's become a roller coaster since the beginning of the session. It began with knowing that they were trying to keep to the 60 days, minimal investment, that we were also dealing with the new lack of access with some of the members because of the new requirements, them not taking paper, really hard to get in to get meetings. Those seem to be really big challenges at the time. And by the end of session, they were almost forgotten as the COVID-19, the coronavirus, started to creep into our world in Olympia, which is a pretty we're in a bubble down there. We're aware of things, but we're really focused on the work being done. And the last, I want to say, few weeks, everything changed, and it was really about our response to COVID-19, how that was going to affect our schools, our families. We've been really excited when the proposed budgets from both the House and the Senate were released. We looked at those, even though they released them on the same day, which is kind of unheard of, but they did that. With the expectation of a positive in our revenue, there was some strong investments in places. The final, when they went into negotiations, COVID-19 and the expected economic impact of that really started to play in those closed door negotiations with the budget writers and the executive branch. And between it was only a few days between them when they were proposed budgets were released by the two chambers, the House and Senate, and we saw the negotiated budget, they had taken another $1 billion out of what they had first proposed in anticipation of what might be coming down the line. So as I said, it was a roller coaster. It was like trying to get used to new situations, and it didn't really even matter by the time we were getting out of Olympia. And you have probably been aware, there has been a real hands-on deck with all the agencies and cabinet members of the executive branch, and OSPI and others on how to handle the current situation that was not anticipated when we had our first webinar, only 70 some days ago, not even that, regarding the session. But positive, Lori Jenkins, now Speaker of the House, Democrat, 27th District, first female, first openly member of the LGBTQ community to hold that spot. She was a rock star. She really had a different way of doing it, which I thought was exciting. She really worked well with her chairs, listened to her chairs. I think there was a lot of respect on how she did it. So that was a positive. But as the session ended, there were some big retirements on both chambers that will be big shoes to fill next year. You had like the Eric Pettigrew, who was the caucus chair for so long, Democrat from the 37th, stepping down in the House. And then after session was over, we learned that Representative Pat Sullivan, the majority leader in the House, also stepped down. So there was this sprinkling of bittersweet moments. And then the big, can't believe Pat's gone by the end of the 61st day, I guess, of session. So that's what I have. It's still a little bit chaotic. I'm hoping people are keeping updated. If you're K-12 focused or GCYF with the Childcare, you're looking at their websites daily because things are developing daily on how we're moving forward as a state, which is basic in our community. Oh, Julia, was there anything specific you wanted me to cover besides those things, or?
Nope, I think that's great, and I'm sure folks will have questions.
Please, please.
Right. So now we'll move into the LEV priority areas. So going into the 2020 session, League of Education Voters had 5 priority areas. First was special education resources, then creating supportive and safe learning environments, equitable access to levy and local effort assistance funds, high quality early childhood education, and closing gaps in K-3. So first, in special education resources, the main priority of League of Education Voters this year was to lift the 13.5% cap on funded enrollment of students receiving special education services. So we had many really promising conversations with legislators throughout the session on this. Also had a number of partner organizations also support the lifting of the cap, and League of Education Voters is part of the Investing in Student Potential Coalition. We had a large and incredibly successful advocacy day where community members got to come and talk to their legislators, and many of them discussed the inequity created by this funding cap on special education services and student access to services. So we really, we feel like we really pushed the conversation here and the understanding of legislators of the impacts that this cap has, particularly on small local education agencies across our state. Unfortunately, there was no cap lift included in any of the final legislation or budgets that made it across the line by the end of session. The legislature did invest an additional $1.9 million into the safety net fund that districts and local education agencies can access if they have high-cost students or community impact that creates a larger enrollment of special education students in their district. And so we're encouraged to see that small increase in investment there, as more districts will likely need to access this funding. There was also a measure put forward by the Senate, Senate Bill 6117, sponsored by Senator Wellman, and this was a request from OSPI, and it would have provided increased funding for special education services by increasing the multiplier in the funding formula. So this legislation did not include a lifting of the 13.5% cap, but would have put more money into the special education system. This proposal, unfortunately, did not make it through the House at the end of session. So this increase did not happen. Moving on to supportive and safe learning environments. League of Education Voters had two priorities in this area this year, providing reliable and consistent access to mental health services for students in every school building, and then encouraging and enabling districts to implement multi-tiered systems of support. There were a number of proposals that came through this year regarding supportive and safe learning environments. Most notably, what passed was House Bill 2816. This directs WASDA, so the Washington State School Directors Association, to create a model policy for school boards to adopt. And this policy would be to create positive school climates. This policy would be made publicly available on WASDA's website, and then districts will have the option to adopt. It would not be required at the moment. There was also a really encouraging investment in the final budget, $31.8 million for counselors. And these counselors would be provided for high poverty elementary schools, and the money would have to be spent on providing those counselors in those schools, so really directed and targeted at the students that have the highest needs. There was also an additional investment of $2.6 million to strengthen the network of behavioral supports and school safety measures. This is additional investment in the work group and the work of that work group and recommendations from House Bill 1216 from the 2019 session. A bill that did not pass, but that we were really excited about this session, was House Bill 2690, and this bill would have directed OSPI to create a implementation framework for multi-tiered systems of support for the entire K-12 system. So would have helped facilitate and build capacity in the system to implement MTSS, which is one of our priorities. A couple of other notable investments in student and family supports. $150,000 was invested for the Governor's Office of the Education Ombuds to increase their capacity in terms of staffing, but also to fund the creation of a diversity, equity, and inclusion training for the OEO to take around the state. There was also an investment of $133,000 for OSPI and DCYF to collaborate on the creation of a family engagement plan for both the early learning and the K-12 systems. In the area of equitable access to levy and LEA funds, local effort assistance funds, our priority was to reform the local effort assistance program to account for student and community needs rather than just property values. There were not proposals this session that would have addressed the student and community needs. There were a number of proposals that would have addressed some of the inequities in the system around property values for districts. But none of them moved through the full legislative process. What we did see happen this session was an additional investment of $45.8 million. This was a one-time hold harmless for some districts who are eligible for local effort assistance, but the amount that they're eligible for has changed based on changes in property values in their district. So this holds them harmless to make sure that they have access to what was originally budgeted. And finally, in the area of increasing access to high quality early childhood education, LEV's priority was to increase access to high quality, affordable, culturally and linguistically responsive early learning, including childcare and preschool. Going into this session, we knew there was going to be robust debate about this issue. There were two omnibus bills that were presented at the very beginning of session, one from Senator Wilson, Senate Bill 6253, and one from Representative Sen, House Bill 2661. And we did a webinar on those, or a LEVinar, excuse me, last month on those, which I believe you can find online. But both of these bills laid out a vision for what an integrated system of early childhood education could look like in Washington state, and really kind of set the bar and the goal for where we should be going as a state. So really exciting to see those bills come forward, and looking forward to continuing to move the ball forward in those areas. In terms of outcomes for this 2020 session, House Bill 2456 passed, and the budget's included a $2 million investment to extend the homeless grace period for Working Connections childcare. So now families can
Oh, Julia, I just lost your audio.
You want me to jump in?
Sure, that would be great.
Okay, so I don't have the visual of me, but until she's back in. So she's talking about the homeless grace period for the Working Connections childcare. This would be for helping families who currently are experiencing homelessness. It would extend them to the whole 12 months instead of having to renew and at a 4-month period. And then we also did for the Working Connections childcare a rate increase of a little over $32 million and $6 million for that copay cliff that we know many parts of the state and many individuals are experiencing. This brings the rate increases for level 2 across the board, so it also would include the before and after school care, and bringing everybody up to about 65%. So it's a significant increase on that. Our priority bill, one of our priority bills this year was for the gap closing in K-3. Our priority is to restore funds to districts unable to reduce their class size and investment strategies in line with the integrated protocol support. We actually worked with Representative Callan and sponsored the bill 2719 that would allow the K-3 class size funds not to continue to not go away, and use those funds to support for student support for until 2022. And that bill did not pass, but we'll continue to have those conversations. People were interested, they were positive about making sure that schools would be able to continue to access these funds as long as they were moving forward to meeting the goals of with the class size reduction, the K-3 class size reduction. So I didn't know if she wanted to go into any more of the budget issues, but
thank you, Carey.
No
Sorry,
problem.
everyone.
I'm like, I don't
know. Phone dropped me. that was great. So I think that closes us out in terms of our priority legislation. Did want to highlight that League of Education Voters has put together a couple of resources for folks. We have a budget summary, which is linked to here on the slide, as well as a wrap-up blog, and both of those provide some more detail on what was included in the budget, as well as some more detail around the debates in what happened this session. So with that, I think we can go ahead and take questions.
All right, great. Thank you so much, Julia. Thank you so much, Carey. We have about 10 minutes for questions. So for you who are listening, no question is too basic. Just type your question in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And I do have one to get us going. And this is a question probably for you, Carey. With House Majority Leader Pat Sullivan retiring, who do you think will fill the role as Majority Leader, and what would the impact of that be on Washington State education?
Well, of course, losing Representative Sullivan as the Majority Leader is a great loss for Washington, but also especially for our K-12 system. He's always been one of the biggest supporters. He was in the negotiation on McCleary. He has, he's accessible, he listens, he tries to find common ground. So it's a huge loss. I don't know who's going to be that's a caucus decision on who from leadership who they move into that leadership. Sullivan's been there for a long time. He worked well both with the new speaker and also former speaker Chop. The members felt like they had his ear, and also he backed them a lot. So I can only guess, and that's not going to help anybody, but just recognize that he played a significant impact to K-12 in funding and in policy. Right. So that didn't really help, sorry, but I'm not in the caucus. So
Yeah, no problem, no problem. So here's a question. How would you rate the chances for special education funding seeing an increase in the 2021 session?
Well, if you had asked me about 2 to 3 weeks ago, I would have said that there's a good chance. I think there's a recognition among legislators that there is still a gap in funding for special education services. I think there's debate about what is the best way to invest in special education services, make sure that we're targeting resources and making sure that we're providing the most effective supports and services to students. So things like universal design for learning and inclusive environments, and making sure that our system has the capacity to provide those best practices. With the impact of COVID-19, the impact that might have on our economy, I think we're in very uncertain times and some uncharted territory in terms of what will happen in the 2021 budget. So from a policy perspective, would have been very optimistic about it and us seeing some investment in 2021. From an economic perspective right now, I'm not sure.
All right, well, that's fair enough. Now we have another question here, which is, where do you think the recommendations from the staff enrichment work group will go in the next session?
That is a great question. So for some background for folks on the phone, OSPI has been working with a staffing enrichment work group, and this is something that was born out of 2242, which was the quote-unquote McCleary solution legislation that passed in 2017. And this staffing enrichment work group was tasked with examining the prototypical school model and how many staff are allocated within that model, and also looking at what the voters had passed as Initiative 1351, which is commonly called the Class Size Reduction Initiative. However, the majority of the policy changes in that initiative were around the prototypical model and increasing the staff allocations for prototypical schools. The enrichment work group came out with recommendations in January. It all feels so long ago. And so I would encourage everyone to look at their report online. There was a hearing on a bill this session in the Senate, and I believe it was Bill 6615, that would have put into place their recommendations. And while while Chair Wellman said that the bill wasn't going anywhere this session, it was a way of just kind of airing the recommendations and getting the recommendations kind of out for the public and out for debate. I would imagine that we will see legislation again next session that will include these recommendations. I think there will also be a lot of work in the interim among advocacy groups and other policy wonks and think tanks and whatnot around the recommendations and how do we build more equity into the recommendations. Currently, they give all schools the same amount, or rather the same staff allocations, regardless of student population, with the exception of some class sizes. League of Education voters, as well as many of our partners, would like to see more consideration given to student demographics and student need in schools as a way of driving resources and making sure that students that have higher needs are getting the resources and the staff that they need in their schools. So I think that there will be robust debate both in the interim and next session.
Great, thank you, Julia. So we have a few more questions that we can take. Again, if you have a question, just type it in the chat screen at the bottom of your screen, or the chat box in the bottom of your screen. All right, what would help engage more special education families in the process, or help them understand how their experiences can impact lawmaking and how they might get involved?
That is an excellent question. And I think legislators do need to hear more from families that are currently within the system and being impacted by these very policies. So as I mentioned, LEV is part of the Investing in Student Potential Coalition. So I would encourage parents and community members to go to that webpage. It is studentpotential.org. And there are opportunities there to engage on social media. There's also opportunities if individuals are interested in blog posts. You can sign up for our listserv, and during legislative session, we put out email blasts and different action alerts that people can take. I would also encourage parents and community members, especially during the interim, so before the 2021 session, to go and meet with your legislator in district. You're going to get a lot more time to actually have a real sit-down conversation with your representative or your senator. During session, they tend to be quick, kind of 15-minute meetings. You're in and out, you know, the legislator offices may be more accessible as well during the interim. And so would encourage folks to reach out to their representatives right now and get meetings and start to build those relationships, because that's really what, and, you know, Carey, jump in if there's anything I'm missing, yeah. Legislators respond to that relationship with their constituents. So it's really important to start building that relationship now.
I do have one other thing. So I don't know if all the districts, but majority of the districts now have put together, like, not quite support groups, but families coming together, talking about experiences kind of with district employees, if not some of the teachers. They meet several times a year. I think it's some meet, I know I've heard some meet monthly or bi-monthly or quarterly. I would recommend, once we're able to do this again, actually inviting your legislative delegation to one of those meetings, to have them come, meet the parents, talk, and even if they're just doing it on the phone, so they're seeing how many. I attend one of those meetings in my district. I'm always impressed with how honest people are, how willing they are to talk about what their needs are, what's not being met, what's being done well. And I think that a lot of just, they're hearing from individuals, but to see this, a large group coming together would be impressive and would be impact decision making of those legislators. And so I would invite them. If you don't have one of those get-togethers with your district in the evening or during the day, I would then contact your district and see if you could start one, because I find them very helpful.
Great, thank you. All right, we have time for 2 more questions. And the first one is it too early to look ahead to the 2021 long session? And what might be realistic priority areas next year? Is it too hard to plan for that, as we don't know how the legislative elections will shake out?
No, it's not. I think more, it's not quite the elections, although that will play a role. Right now, we're unsure of what are, as Julie was saying earlier, what the economic impact of the COVID-19 is going to be. There's rumors that we might be brought back in June to maybe do some adjustments even as a supplemental. So I don't think it's, you start talking about policy, start talking about needs, building relationships with legislators now. But no, it's never too early to, I mean, during session, we're already talking about what needs to be done in the long session of 2021. So timing wise, understand that people are under a lot of stress and anxiety right now. Your legislators might not be as, quick to respond or be willing to discuss policy changes for the upcoming session right now, but as they're dealing with putting fires out on the home front and also trying to figure out how the legislature should be responding to what's happening in our communities. But it's never too early to start talking about what needs to be done in the long session.
Great, thank you, Julia. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
I was just going to say it's never too early to start thinking about that and having those conversations and building off of the progress or thinking about strategy on the things you didn't make progress on in this session going into next. So yeah.
Great, thank you. All right, I have one comment and then one final question. The comment is, as a Democratic candidate running in a Republican district, please invite your local candidates to your discussions too. And then the question is,
great.
If the legislature does reconvene in June, what are some things we should be watching for?
Carey, do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Again, and you said we're in uncertain times. There's no playbook for what's happening right now. And we know there will be an economic impact. We're seeing it, across the board. Our schools are closed right now. We're hoping they might be opening back up, but we also are planning on the fact that we may be done for the year and how that impacts families that need to work and our childcare that, they are on the front lines. And so coming back in, I will say the state has been firm. They're meeting their commitments. They're paying the people they need to be paying. They're trying to do, they are building that plane though as they're flying it as moving forward. So a lot of coming back in isn't going to make any huge adjustments to our K-12 funding. What it's going to be doing is looking at how this is impacting the families, how it's impacting, do we need to looking at the equity as how we've been trying to do school. It's going to be a lot of it on the economic services side. So that's what will be coming back in. So they put $1 billion into, they put $200 million into the bill they passed, the policy bill they passed off the floor of both the House and the Senate for the coronavirus. There's access to another $1 billion that they reduced the final budget by, and that's on top of the other. So there's about $3 billion sitting there if necessary that they can access. So that's what they'll be looking at to see if they can support families, because it's going to be rough. And yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Carey. Thank you so much, Julia. Our next webinar happens this Thursday, so 2 days from now, speaking of COVID-19 and coronavirus. Washington State Superintendent Chris Rakedahl will join us to share the state of Washington schools in the wake of the coronavirus crisis and answer your questions. You can register by visiting our website, educationvoters.org, and clicking on events, then lunchtime webinars. I'll also send a registration link in my follow-up email, which you'll be getting 24 hours from now. Thanks to each of you for joining us today. If you have additional questions or comments, please send them to Eric, spelled A-R-I-K, at educationvoters.org. A recording of today's presentation will be available on our website, educationvoters.org, and will be sent to you in the follow-up email. Please feel free to share it with your friends and colleagues. If you would like to learn more about League of Education Voters or support our work, please visit our website, educationvoters.org. Thank you again for attending. We hope you will join us at future webinars. Carey, Julia, thank you so much.
Thank you.